It's hard to tell even for me, even within one paragraph, but it's about why people are terrorized by words. George Carlin told me that he used that book as a reference for the routine where he gets up and recites all the different terms for some sex act. Have you ever seen him do that?
Yes.
Yeah, yodeling in the valley, going down to the wife for lunch, on and on and on. He got a whole bunch of them out of that book, he told me. Why are people so terrorized by words? It's a fascinating subject. Arlen told me once I'm the most adaptable person she ever knew. And although she was in love with me and therefore prejudiced, had a higher opinion of me than I ever had of myself, I think she's right about the adaptability. I seem to have led a dozen different lives in one lifetime. I don't seem to have a very rigid personality structure. I went from being a Playboy editor to being a self-employed freelance writer, which resulted after a year of using up my savings. It resulted in 2 years on welfare, which I talk about quite commonly, just because I sometimes engage in debates, and I can always tell if the other guy is an asshole if he brings that up in order to put me down. You know, then I know I'm dealing with a real asshole, and I know how to handle assholes. I've known them since I was a child. You know? And then my book started making enough money, and I got off welfare.
Were you still at Playboy when you started writing Illuminatus?
Yeah. As a matter of fact, I was still at Playboy when we finished Illuminatus. It just took 5 years to get it published. It just didn't fit into the Madison, Lexington Avenue reality tunnel where all the big publishers are. It took a long, long time. Shay and I never lost faith in it. We really believed we'd written a terrific book. But it took us 5 years to get it published anyway.
How did you finally end up getting it published?
Oh, somebody at Dell had the moxie to keep on pushing until his superiors agreed, okay, we'll give it a chance, but cut it up into 3 books so it's not such a big risk.
Didn't you also have to remove like 500 pages?
Yeah, they wanted it to be shorter so the investment in paper would not be such a big financial risk. Those 500 pages got lost. When they made that decision, I was in Mexico, Shay was in Chicago, and Dell was in New York, and with the papers flying back and forth as we made the cuts, most of the cuts got lost. People keep asking me, will they ever be published? No, but some of them have been published in a sense, because some of them came back to my mind and got incorporated into another novel of mine called Schrodinger's Cat, which explains why some of the characters from Illuminatus reappear in Schrodinger's Cat. This is material that I remembered and recreated in Schrodinger's Cat.
Was it a pleasant experience to collaborate with Robert Shay?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we never had the kind of feud that Gilbert and Sullivan had. Nothing remotely like that.
Did you rewrite each other's pieces?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. He'd write a section, I'd rewrite it and add to it, and he'd rewrite the whole thing and add to that. That was our method. Other collaborators use other methods. That was our method.
So when you switched to full-time writing, did you have in your mind a whole series of books you wanted to write, or were you just trusting that there was enough material there in vestigial form? I
always felt from childhood on that I was supposed to write books. I don't know, when I started my freelance career, I don't know how many books I had in my head that I thought I was going to write, and I don't know how many of them I ever got around to writing. A freelance writer's career is not entirely self-determined. If a publisher appears with a big check and says, can you write a book on this subject for this check, it turns out I can write a book on that subject, and it'll turn out sounding just like I thought of it myself by the time I'm through with it. The Book of the Breast for Playboy Press, which is now out under the title Ishtar Rising, that came about because they asked me, can you write a whole book about the female breast and keep it interesting? I said, sure I can. And I did. And it turns out to be a very interesting analysis of the rise and fall of goddess worship and how it relates to historical patterns in general. It lends itself to lots of illustrations of bare-breasted women, which is what Playboy Press wanted. But it sort of foreshadows a lot of interesting theories that came out of neo-Reichian psychology and feminism in the last 20 years or so. There's a book called Saharasia. It's written by a guy named James D. Mayo. He used the two largest computer data banks on customs of cultures around the world. And he found cultures tend to be with 95% accuracy to follow one of two patterns, which he calls armored patrist and unarmored matrist. Well, in Ishtar Rising, I call them oral matrist and anal patrist, but they're basically the same categories. Only he did a hell of a lot more research than I did and proved his case a lot better than I did. But I find it absolutely amazing that just as an amateur anthropologist, I managed to get a certain axis of reference that does seem to have a certain validity. I see it being quoted more and more in various places, not always attributed to me. But then I didn't invent it entirely. I took part of it out of an English sociologist called Rat Ray Taylor, who wrote a book called Sex and History. He just divided them into matrist and patrist. I added the oral and anal to make it coincide with Freudian developmental theory, and DeMayo added armored and unarmored to make it coincide with Reichian theory.
Isn't that book, Ishtar Rising, still in print?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. It's still selling quite well, thank you. It's been selling quite well for 28 years, I guess. Well, most of my books from the 70s are still in print. Matter of fact, all of my books from the 70s are in print. The only books that are out of print are 3 historical novels I wrote in the 80s.
When did you first feel like you were making it as a professional writer?
I've never quite achieved that state of mind. Because of the ups and downs of a freelance writer's life, I always have in the back of my head this ledger about how many months I've got before I'm broke unless I earn some more money. And when it's more than 12 months, I feel fairly secure. When it's less than 6 months, I start getting frightened. But it's never been less than 6 months in the last 3 or 4 years, or maybe the last 5 or 6 years, I don't know. I mean, it's never fallen really low, but I still have the habit of worry. That comes out of being a freelance writer. You never know where the next check is coming from. I'm worrying less about money than I ever did before, I'll say that.
Why is that?
Well, I don't have as many dependents as I used to have, for one thing, and for another thing, unless I lose all my popularity, whatever it is, and nobody buys any of my books, I can virtually live on the royalties of the books I got in print now. I can't live handsomely and extravagantly like a Hollywood star or any of that stuff. But I can live at a comfortable middle-class standard of living, which is all I ever required of life. I just want comfort. I don't need luxury. As long as I'm comfortable and I'm not worried about how I'm going to eat, I can concentrate on my writing. That's all I ask for, is I'm not distracted by money worries and can concentrate on my writing. And it's taken me quite a while to realize I reached that stage probably about 10 years ago, but the habit of worry didn't go away immediately. It still hung on, and to some extent it still hangs on occasionally. Supposing everybody did stop buying Illuminata suddenly, that ought to be about $8,000 a year less. That's about how much I make out of that book every year. My God, $8,000 less. Then supposing everybody stopped buying Prometheus Rising, there's another $4,000 a year gone. Where would I be? So you can't stop worrying entirely. Not in this business. And if I had a bestseller and got rich, I'd be worrying